No.
Mhm.
Oh, now it
Yes,
is.
and
Okay,
you're
great.
ready.
All right. So this is a personal introduction rather than a formal one, because in 1996, over 25 years ago, as I was staying at a lesbian friend's home in Queens, New York, she gave me a cassette tape and said she thought I would really like to listen to it. So there was a cassette player in the bedroom where I was staying, and I slipped a small cartridge into the player, not knowing anything about you or your work, and thinking that it was going to be a relaxing bedtime story. Far from it. I listened to that story of the second coming of Joan of Arc. I was mesmerized, exhilarated. My mind started going a mile a minute. Yes, yes, I said to myself, I know this woman is a butch dyke. Yes, this is what Joan of Arc was. A beautiful, strong, loving, sensitive, courageous butch dyke with a vision and a purpose. And I knew that I had to bring this story to my community in Florida. So several years later, I figured out how I could do that. I gathered 10 community groups to sponsor 10 tickets each for $10 so that we would have the guarantee of the $1,000 for your fee. Groups like NOW and CASA and the Metro Center and the Girls Club and the YWCA and our feminist bookstore and our own salon, along with individual donors in the winter of 1999. We transported you from Fort Myers and we hosted you in our bedroom, in our guest bedroom, and we fed you in our house and we cooked meals, and I idolized you. Years later, you began to present the lesbian tent revival at Michigan. You helped us coalesce over our thoughts and experiences with our lesbian feminist ideologies and politics. Through Sister Carolyn of the Sisterhood of the Sacred Synapse, you bring an evangelical flavor to your followers in the sermons that you say run the gamut from lesbian relationships to quantum physics, from the anatomy of the clitoris to the microbiology of depression. We have had fun, and as if we were all part of the play. Though the tent revival isn't really a play, it's about our lives, and it is as we are living them. You've created 24 sermons, and I saw you at Madison and National over the years. I've been personally seeing productions of The Ugly Ducklings and Babe, an Olympian musical. You've written and published 12 books and more than 90 plays, including musicals, one-acts, one-woman shows, and dramas. You're the winner of numerous awards, and your work is widely published and performed. Recently, since the pandemic, we've seen Artemisia and Hildegard, McClintock's Corn, and The Star Pattern. For us old lesbians, it's always exhilarating that we see ourselves in stories of strong women, as well as the validation of who we are as lesbians in history. You helped us build community. This group of Western Massachusetts for several years has had our own mini Mishfest. We always gather on the Sunday morning of our weekend and we play one of the lesbian tent revival sermons. Then we have our own lively conversation about the ideas that you bring up. So as you can see, we are overjoyed to have you come and have a conversation with us here on Zoom. Welcome, Carolyn. So one of the things that I want, the first question, as I said, is what would you like most to talk to us about today?
Well, I have a list of things actually. And so with your permission, I will just begin to talk about those. Today is March 6th. It's my 29th anniversary in a 12-step program, Al-Anon. Just want to give myself a shout out for that, and all my recovery sisters. Uh, March 6th in 1923 was the date that a play called God of Vengeance moved from the Yiddish Theater in New York to Broadway, to the Apollo Theater. That was a big move, going from, it was in Yiddish and it was for a very particular, heavily marginalized community, to the big time. And it was in English and so on, Broadway. And I think they were all arrested, if not that night, shortly thereafter, for obscenity. But God of Vengeance was a play, an amazing play. It remains, in my opinion, the most lesbian, the most truth-telling, and the most feminist play. That was 99 years ago. It still remains the most. So God bless it. But also, why in 99 years does it still remain the only one to go to first class? And it depicted a Jewish family, middle-class family, living upstairs over a brothel. And the playwright made a very strong connection between the prostitution of the women in the brothel and the prostitution of middle-class daughters in these brokered marriages. It was something that a lot of us second wavers were noticing, that a lot of marriages are transactional. A lot of marriages are actually somewhere in the sex for money spectrum. And it was just astonishing. This is 1923. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because I have 35 plus years of writing professionally, playwriting, and we don't have lesbian theaters. And when I first began, it was like 86 or something like that, and lesbian culture was just really starting to flower. And we had bookstores, we had lesbian presses, we had lesbian choruses, we had lesbian and women's music festivals, and the women's music festivals were usually largely lesbian. Drum circles, we had tea dances, we had country western dances, we had lesbian craft fairs. We eventually evolved lesbian recording labels, lesbian cruise lines. And I just thought, well, any minute now, we'll have lesbian theaters. And I wrote a book, Take Stage, about how to organize a lesbian theater, if you didn't know. And I wrote 2 volumes of monologues and scenes so that lesbian actors coming along wouldn't be forced into doing nothing but heterosexual stuff. It never happened. It never happened. And it's still a mystery to me. Like play acting, pretending. You watch puppies play and they, puppies playing, They pretend to be aggressors when they're really playing. They pretend to be big dogs. It's a really animal activity. Acting it's just like singing, like dancing, like creating things in clay or painting. It's an art, it's a form of art that is really human. And it's pretty essential to how we learn. It's also how we empower ourselves. We see ourselves reflected. It's how we get other cultures to understand us. They come to a lesbian-centric play, and they're like, oh, it's like the first time white people, I think the first Broadway show that centered people of color was Raisin in the Sun, and there was only one white person, and they were very unattractive. They were in a racist neighborhood association. And here's these white audiences just like, oh my God, is this really what we look like? It's like, yeah, pretty much. To a huge percentage of the population, this is what you look like. And that's a teaching moment. But if you don't have theater, if you don't have these plays, then these folks never get to enter a world. They're not going to come live in a lesbian community, but they can sit in one for 2 hours. And I feel the great tragedy of my life, it's like being some kind of really skilled violin player in a world where there are no musicians, no orchestras, no small groups. People will hire you to go into their living room and play the violin, and you can keep yourself alive like that. But it's a great tragedy that I have lived in a time when my own people didn't have theaters. And so I just wanted to say that has been absolutely my greatest oppression. And the festivals can't really bring us in. Michigan never did want Joan of Arc. I don't know why. I went all over the world with it, but Michigan, and not for lack of trying. So I did the tent revival, but they didn't really have an interest in my theater. Because they're not set up to do theater. National, God love them, really sponsored theater. And it was hard. It's a hard fit. Theater is a very particular thing, and it's not a concert. It's not, so, it takes weeks of rehearsal. It's a whole different animal. And I've appreciated the festivals so much that did bring in theater, even though it was a really foreign art form to them. But I just wanted to say that it was, that's been really painful and difficult. And what I do is I encourage lesbians, especially in the age of Zoom, to do readings. Readings don't require a theater, they don't require a set, you don't have to get costumes, you don't have to put in umpteen hours of rehearsal. You can rehearse once and you can put it up in Zoom. Or you can read them in your living room. But plays are meant to be performed. They're meant not to sit alone in your room and read all the parts. They should be performed, even if it's performing a reading. So I just want to say that. It's been incredibly challenging to me to hammer myself into these living rooms and these concert stages at women's festivals. And it's really been difficult to be such a prolific and dedicated playwright in a world that has zero. I'm not talking about zero professional lesbian theaters. I'm talking about zero lesbian theaters. We really failed the younger generation, and I think that we're reaping some of what we sow in that. We don't have good representation. When you see somebody who's LGBT on TV or in the film, it's a guy. It certainly fits the patriarchal narrative better. It doesn't bend everything out of shape like a lesbian narrative. But we got nothing to say. We don't have our own. We certainly don't have our own film companies, but we don't even have our own little community theaters. So I really just.
Do you think that it's because it's so revolutionary?
No, I think it's because it's a bad fit for lesbians. If you do a play, and most people, when they think lesbian plays, they think of one-woman shows, or they think of something like Mother Tongue, which was wonderful, but it was women all getting up and doing monologues about their own personal experience. I mean, for somebody coming from a tradition of Shakespeare and Moliere and Racine, no, not plays, not what I do. So if you're doing a play like Moliere, Racine, or some of my plays, you have casts of 10 to 25 people. They all have to be in the same place at 8 o'clock on a certain night, saying the exact same line over and over again and doing the exact same thing. And that is like a military maneuver. The precision involved in that. You're standing in the wings because you have to bring on a prop. You're waiting for your cue. You're relying on the other 19 people in that cast to be where they're supposed to be at the exact moment they're supposed to say that line. That takes a lot of discipline, and that level of military discipline requires a hierarchy. It's not like everybody just sits in the drum circle and lets loose. It's not like you show up for the softball game and it doesn't matter if you're having a bad day, somebody else will take your place. No. In theater, if you're not in the intensive care unit, you are at the theater. There's no middle ground. If you can walk and you can talk, you show up for the performance. That kind of thing sits really poorly with lesbians. I've had lesbians say, "Oh, I just can't do the show tonight. I'm taking a mental health day." never mind, I've got a house of 200 people who bought tickets, and I've got 15 other actors who are ready and waiting, and all of that grinds to a halt so you can take your mental health day. That concept was really foreign. It was like I was oppressed. If I put any pressure on them when they're taking care of themselves, I was an abuser, of course. We know how that goes. It's a real tough fit for lesbians and lesbian recreational activities. And lesbians have not come up through the ranks of academic theater or community theater because we don't fit the patriarchal narrative. My first theater company, for 3 years, I had dozens of women work with me. One of them had previous experience in theater. So yeah, we have formidable obstacles, and then we've survived by keeping our head down and moving forward. And I was putting people front and center who are survivors of sexual abuse and out about it, putting butch women forward, putting forward women with facial hair, putting forward women of size, putting forward folks who have survived by being in the shadows and low key. And I feel like that is challenging. That requires a level of support maybe we don't have. There's a lot of reasons why lesbians don't do theater. And, you know, and they're real. They're real, for sure. They're real. And it's very scary to stand center stage when your whole tribe has survived by specifically avoiding that spotlight. And it's just, and we didn't get a welcome. We don't get a big welcome from our gay brothers, and they have always found safety in theater. Theater is rife with gay men, even straight theaters, packed with gay men. And they didn't really step up to make it a comfortable experience for us. They have a long tradition that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years of finding refuge in theater. We didn't. We were always, as women, obstacles or rewards for men. And we were going to have to show up with an extraordinary amount of courage, self-confidence, and politic, I think, to overcome those obstacles. And we didn't, and we still aren't. And, you know, young women today will not even use the word lesbian. So for them to conceive of a lesbian specific theater is a real stretch, honestly. Yeah, so
Would you like,
go
yeah,
ahead.
would you like to say a little bit about No to Men?
Well, that was my first theater
I
company,
know,
and
yeah.
well, I know now. I understand myself to be an autistic person, and naming a theater company No to Men in a very small, rural, homophobic village is probably the most autistic thing I ever did in my life. And lots of people in the, you know, in that kind of lesbian indirect way drop by where I live to let me know that's probably not a good idea. We'll probably all get in trouble if you do that. And I'm not hearing it because I'm autistic. That's a social cue. I'm like, what? No, it's a great name. Are you kidding me? It's long overdue. It's an idea whose time has come. The world is going to stand up and cheer when I open the doors on No to Men Theater. And they were kind of like, we live here. We're going to tell you how that's going to go. And of course, that's how it went. But I got to say, there's part of me that really loves myself for doing it. Another part of me is just like, oh, good Lord, you know, like what, on what planet, in what world did you think
Right.
that would not end the way that it did? But yeah,
That was
and
heartbreaking for you, I know at the time.
well, it was heartbreaking for a lot of reasons. I mean, I came from middle class background. I had 2 degrees in theater. I was entering a community that was had large numbers of working class women involved in the theater company. I didn't have a lot of education about class stuff. Again, I look back on some of my choices. I'm like, holy moly.
Yeah.
But it was dangerous, and I just was barreling ahead. I'd burned all my bridges. You know, everybody said, if you're going to do lesbian theater, it's 1986, it's like professional suicide. And I'm like, no, this is going to be awesome. Yeah, it was it was, well, it was what it was. And I certainly learned lessons I could have learned. I forget what famous writer said, there are things that you will learn from putting your hand on a stove that you can learn in no other way. And that was me and No to Men productions. But part of it was when you said you were doing women's theater, everybody had a different idea of what that was. Like women
Awesome.
in funny little bucket hats, doing suffrage stuff. Or it was like, and it really did mean a variety of things. And I didn't want to have to explain what I was doing. So when I called it No to Men, everybody was crystal clear exactly what I was doing. And of course, they wanted to take me down for it, but they did eliminate that. I didn't want to have the experience of women coming through the doors being shocked and frightened by what my women's theater was actually about, horrified by women with facial hair and fleeing out the exits. I didn't want, it
You
was
didn't
like,
want the bridge club to come,
the what?
the bridge club.
Yeah, the women's theater, like, oh, I think this will be good enrichment, and I think we're probably going to do some suffrage work. I don't know what they were going to do, but and I did do suffrage plays, and some of those absolutely rock. But I just use that example of what people think when they think of women's history, and I was dealing a lot with rape and incest, and I had women that killed men on the stage, and so I didn't have to. Um, I'm a people pleaser. It hurt my feeling. I have many experiences of women coming to audition, becoming terrified just by the women in the room and leaving. I wanted to protect my actors from that experience as well as myself. And naming it No to Men, pretty much anybody appalled at that would be appalled at that name and not come through the door. If you
Yeah,
came
yeah,
through the
yeah.
door, you knew what you were getting into.
Yeah.
So,
Once the door was open, you
yeah,
knew
that
that you were going to set.
perspective.
And it's like Jackie and I say that when we come to theater, when we step through that door, we suspend everything that we knew. And we are just there to take in what it is that the people have to offer us.
I still had men coming and masturbating in the back row because it was advertised as a lesbian play. And of course, it's a play about women murdering men. I don't know what but it was just that the word lesbian was equated with pornography. You
Yeah,
know, I mean
yeah,
that, and some of that's being in a rural community where it never occurred to them that lesbians were angry and organized. But yeah, it was an interesting time, and I learned many, many things. Yeah, and actually, the producer of Cagney and Lacey couldn't get Shakespeare tickets that night and came to my theater, and she offered me a job writing on that show. And that was a nice moment for me because I got to make a choice. And I said, actually, I have no interest in that because you don't do lesbian, sort of Cagney and Lacey were the closest thing to
right.
lesbians we
Yes,
had,
yes,
but it
that's
was
right.
all very sub rosa, kind of like Xena. It was all kind of, like wink, wink.
Yeah,
And I
right.
said, I want to do that. And I actually offered a job hanging lights for me, which was incredibly hostile and rude. But that was me. Yeah, that was, oh
I
my God,
love
that
it.
was me pre-recovery and being an out lesbian for 10 minutes. I behaved
Yeah,
atrociously. Uh,
yeah,
I felt very embattled, but that was a nice moment for me because it was like, no, I mean it. This is what I want to do with my life. Because that would, that was go
that
to
was right.
Hollywood and write for a hit show. Like, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Um, but
Yeah,
so I got to say, I got to turn somebody down, which doesn't happen very often when you work in lesbian theater, which doesn't exist. So, um, but I wanted to say that, and I wanted to encourage you to, if you're interested in doing a play reading, call me, talk to me. I know my own canon. I can suggest something for the number of women you want, or you want a comedy, or do you want some short one acts? Do you want to do a big show? But I feel like there's a lot of value in doing the readings. I have been
right.
beating that drum for 40 solid years.
I know.
Host readings in your home. Um, but what I wanted to talk about today is there are three of my shows coming up in March and April that are being produced. Um, One is being produced in Florida, one in Chicago, and one in New York, and they're all going to be streamed online. They're Zoom readings, but you'll be able to see them. So I wanted to talk about these plays. Two of them are extremely recent, so they're very much of interest to me because I just wrote them. So if you're comfortable with that, that's what I would like to talk about now.
That's fine, yes. Is one of them happen to be Star Pattern?
Yeah, Star Pattern. I just did the first reading of it
Right.
myself as a webinar,
It
and
was great. It was fabulous.
yeah, thank you. And there's a theater festival out of Tampa Bay, Florida,
Right.
called Power Stories, run by Fran Powers, so that's why it's Power Stories. And they're having something called the Festival of Truth. They've got some very interesting looking plays in that lineup. Um, One of them is about a production that was done at a concentration camp. Therese,
Rosenstadt, right.
thank you, Theresienstadt. Yeah, of the Merchant of Venice, which
Uh-huh.
of course has a horrendous Jewish stereotype in it. I'm
Right.
fascinated to see that play.
Yeah,
Apparently, historically, it actually happened.
I
But
see.
anyway, so you buy a ticket to see the show. Mine is paired with another play, and that will buy you a 48-hour window, so you can stream it at your leisure. And Star Pattern was a play that originated when I watched a documentary called Tower. It was an amazing documentary. It was animated, and it was about the 1966 shooting at the University of Texas, Austin, which most of you probably remember. It was a very big deal because it was the first of what we know of now as these contemporary campus shootings. It was the very first. The police department had no long range rifles, no SWAT teams. Nobody'd ever had. The university closed for one day to clean up the blood, reopened, never mentioned it, never had any events around it. It went out of the newspaper. Nobody knew how to deal with this at all. And the sniper carried on for 90 minutes because, like I say, there was no SWAT team. There was no, it was just, people were just absolutely frozen. Like, what do we do now? Like, and that seems very unusual now because we're so used to every week. It seems like there's a mass shooting somewhere. But 1966, it was the first. And in this documentary, the first person he shot was an 18-year-old girl who was 8 months pregnant. And she was with her partner, and he died immediately. He was shot in the neck, and he died immediately. She didn't die. She lay there wounded, 100-degree weather on the South Mall in his line of fire. So nobody came to get her. They were afraid to. And she lay there, I think, a total of over an hour. But after a half an hour, and I mean, the EMTs are here, the ambulances, and everybody's just helplessly standing around watching because they're afraid to rescue her. And suddenly, this 20-year-old little lesbian, Rita, runs out onto the South Mall and lies down next to her. A tremendous act of courage, staggering act of courage, and talks to her and keeps her conscious. She was bleeding out and very much at risk of losing consciousness. And Rita just kept her engaged, kept her talking, and eventually she was rescued. And I was stunned by that and by who Rita was. She's 20. I mean, my God.
Right. It's a very powerful play.
Yeah,
Very
and
powerful.
but also, unlike most of my plays, I just really wrote it to celebrate Rita. Rita died in the 80s, so um, she was, or 90s, I guess. She was in her 50s when she died. She
Right.
got cancer. But Claire is still alive, and Claire has given huge numbers of interviews about this. So there's a huge amount of information about what they talked about on the South Mall and the details of that interaction. So I didn't have a lot of latitude. I thought, I'm going to put up what these women actually did, what they talked about, and try to shape it a little bit, but basically, more than any other play I ever wrote, I'm actually using what really happened.
Mhm.
And and celebrating
Exactly.
both those women. And Claire was, oh my God, she's 18 years old. She's having an out of wedlock baby. Let us all for a second remember 1966. That's a
Right.
hell of a thing. And there's no father in sight. She's having this baby on her own. Um, And she has just come back from registering voters in the Delta. This is the same summer that James Meredith was shot in Memphis, or near Memphis. He was in Mississippi too. But I could no more imagine being 17 years old and going by myself down to the Delta for the voter registration campaign. I think it was around that time that Schwimmer, Cheney, and the other guy were. I mean, it was unbelievably dangerous. And she was 17 years old. She skipped her senior year to stay down there and register voters. So I thought, my God, who are these women? This little
Yeah.
18-year-old, and Rita running out on the South Mall. I'm like, okay, I'm writing a play about these women. They are extraordinary. I was that age in 66, and no way would I have done anything even, I was probably still worrying about what my hair looked like, to tell you the truth. I
Mhm.
just couldn't fathom these women. And also, 66 was such a particular point in time. The farm workers thing was happening, this big march that they had begun to
Right.
organize. And of course, Black Power was happening, and the anti-war thing was really revving up. And the women's movement was just beginning to arrive. And Rita would go on to come out as a lesbian. She founded a press, a women's press, that was a union shop, and that all the progressive organizations did their printing and ran their newspapers out of there. It was a big community organizing place. And then she founded a women's center that is still very active in Austin today. And so it was that moment in time. She had been married. Women were kind of doing what their mothers did, but uncomfortable, and working in all these progressive movements and starting to notice, okay, I'm working for the farm workers, but I'm making coffee. That does,
Right.
how's that work? Noticing that the anti-war papers were sexist as hell. Like, wait a minute, what? And suddenly this movement broke, and we all collectively woke up. Many of us came out, and for Rita, it looks like this moment in time on the South Mall just there's pre-South Mall and post-South Mall, and
Uh-huh.
it was 66. So I wanted to celebrate that moment in time for younger women who weren't there, like what that was like. And it feels like in that moment of extreme male violence, and he was a veteran. He had not gone to Vietnam, but he was a veteran. And the shooter. And I just wanted to maybe revisit my own youth and just celebrate that moment when everything changed. I think Grace Paley used that expression, when everything changed. And obviously, this event utterly transformed Claire's life. She lost the baby, she lost her partner, and was disabled. And then Rita, who went on to become a kind of legendary community organizer and activist. Um, so I love Star Pattern. I feel like it's a really simple play. It's about two women lying on the South Mall under the eye of a shooter, not knowing if they're going to be shot any second, and what they talk about. They create a little oasis of women's land right there.
That's right. Yes. Uh-huh. It is. It's a very powerful play. Very powerful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I encourage people to go to the Power Stories website and buy a ticket for that. And then it also gets you into a live talk back, which will not stream for 48 hours. I think it's on St. Patrick's Day. And I will be talking with the cast. And one of my colleagues went to high school and was close friends with the boy who was shot, Claire's partner. And
Interesting.
it was, and when I started telling her I was doing this, she was like, I can't even read that. I knew Tom, and I
Hmm.
really liked him. And it was they were both 16 years old in high school together. But then she read it, and then she ended up, she's coming to the talk back. She had some great stories about Tom. He was as unusual as Claire and Rita. They were like these evolved souls. I mean, who knew? They were all like teenagers, and they were incredibly activist and fearless. They were just amazing people. But
Yeah.
anyway, so that was the first play that I wanted to talk about. And how are we doing on time? I see we're at 3:53.
Yeah. You're fine.
Two more. Okay, the next play is being done in a very unusual format. It's called Thumbprint listens and reads. And it's a theater company called Thumbprint Studios in Chicago. And what they're doing is they're going to take the play and perform some scenes from it and then have a talk back about the play. So they're not doing a reading of the whole thing, they're just going to do scenes and then have a talk back with me and audience members. And I'm hoping to get somebody, some people from the STEM community, science,
Mhm.
technology,
Right.
whatever the E and the M are. What are the E and the M in STEM? Science, technology, something in math.
Engineering.
Engineering and
Engineering.
math. Thank you. This is a play about Barbara McClintock, who was a geneticist, a biological.
McClintock's corn.
Yeah, in
Is it?
McClintock's corn.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is a play about Barbara McClintock, who was autistic, and she doesn't fit neatly a category of butch or lesbian, but she was certainly gender ambiguous or gender nonconforming. I would say just genderless. That's how she experienced herself. And a lot of the time she experienced herself as not having a body. So when you start talking about gender and sexuality with Barbara, it's a little bit of a like, well, she definitely wasn't heterosexual. She seemed to have some emotionally intimate partnerships with women. It's just she's just autistic, very, very autistic, and
Mhm.
her special interest was genetics, and that is really where her entire life went.
Right.
And her,
It takes that kind of person to be totally focused on those kinds of issues when they do those things. I think that we certainly see some of those kinds of traits in many of the women who did make history because they were so laser focused.
yeah, it certainly was her secret of success, but it also was difficult. She did not get along with other people. She didn't read social cues. She had a job in the South, and the racism was something she could not tolerate. And just it she ended up getting a real break because she got hired to this obscure little lab. It's very famous now, but it was up in Cold Spring Harbor on Long Island, and for 9 months of the year nobody was there. They had a summer program, but they rented her an unheated garage and they kept the lab open for her, and she was like, I'm good. I'm totally good. I come in here and I sleep. And as soon as I get up, I go to the lab and it's heated and I have a phone there at the lab. Just leave me alone. Let me do my work. It's all good.
Right. So I
But
saw that. Where did I see that? Because
that
I
was
saw it.
the Maine Playwrights Festival did a reading of it last year, and they did a
That's where,
brilliant
yes,
job. Those women
yes,
were brilliant.
yeah, yeah.
I don't know how it's going to be in Chicago, but I'm excited about it because it puts an autistic woman on the stage, and I think that's important. Autism is wildly underdiagnosed with women, and I wasn't diagnosed until 2 years ago. And the thing with autism is if you don't know it's autism, if you don't understand it's a neurological thing, we look unbelievably selfish and insensitive. That is what it looks like because we don't read social cues and we are in our own world, on our own planet almost all the time. And when we're not, we're kind of masking. And so it's really important that these women be captured and identified. I had such blatant humming, buzzing, tiptoeing, flapping. I mean, I was pretty classic. I believe now I would have been pegged by first or second grade as autistic. But I was high achieving. And boys with autism had usually horrendous, can't sit in the seat for 3 minutes. So obviously they're pulled out of class in kindergarten and then later diagnosed. But that's not the story for women. It shows differently for us. And then if we're high achieving, and often we're great readers, it's an area of hyper focus. The belief is if you're making straight A's, you're doing good.
Yeah.
And obviously, I was not. My ability to communicate with people was severely impaired. I mean, there were a lot of things that it's just unfair that the only metric that counts is straight A's.
Right.
It's like, oh,
It's
she
like
doesn't. She doesn't need any help,
Greta Thunberg right now. And
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
yes, and she talks about it. And so, that's the good thing, is that she recognizes it, she talks about it, so she also helps us understand who she is and how her mind works.
Well, and also her ability, there's those photographs of her all by herself outside her school building with a sign. That was
Right.
her first protest. And it's funny now because she'll have thousands of people show up for a
Oh, I know.
protest. But it started out just she was this geeky kid with a sign, and where was her mother? Why were her parents letting her do this? And I look at that and I'm like, well, that is autistic as hell. She doesn't give a damn.
That's
It's
right.
like me with no to men. It's like 1,000 people said that's a bad idea. And I'm like, I don't, it seems good, like a good idea to me. And Greta, it's like, oh my God, they're gonna flunk you. You're gonna have penalty. People are gonna look at you weird. And she's like, still not hearing anything that's a reason not to do this because
That's
we
right.
think differently. It's like people threaten to socially ostracize you, and you're kind of like, and what would that feel like? I live in that
Mhm.
world. I'm not on the planet with you anyway, so ostracize away. But it is like she says, it's her secret power. I feel like it was mine also. I would do plays and people would be like, well, in your lifetime, nobody will produce this. And again, I'm like, Greta, like, and why should that
Why not?
matter
Yeah.
to me? What's your point? And a neurotypical person, that is the point. Oh, all right, okay. So what should I write that people will like and want to
Right.
produce? And for me, it was always, well, this is what I have to say, so I can't be responsible for how it lands. This
Right.
is my job to express it. And I think, so I think for me, writing about McClintock, and much of her work in genetics was really out of step with the times. And I cover that. Like her career spanned like, I don't know, 60 years.
Right.
That DNA was discovered in the middle of it in the 50s. And DNA was just the height of arrogance. It was, we have cracked the code to all life. Nobody will ever be sick again. We can genetically engineer this and that. And she kept saying, no, no, the genes, the environment influences the expression of the gene. And nobody believed that. It was like, no, it's a code, it's a zipper. It's like you unzip it and then zip up the other half, and it's identical, and it's just a mechanical process. And
It's
it just,
why strawberries no longer taste like strawberries.
yeah, yeah. But also we know now, like very cutting edge, and she was onto this, is that, we know now that trauma can impact the DNA, and that, if your great grandparents lived through some god awful famine, you're going to have, alterations in the expression of your genes from that trauma.
Mhm.
And it disrupted the male arrogance. It's like, we have cracked the code forever.
Mhm.
We understand this and we can manipulate it, and it only flows one way. When the DNA replicates, it goes from the top down. She's like, no, no, influences all the way up the line. And they were like, no. And
Yes.
she got the Nobel Prize, I think 30 years after she did that work, because the world was not ready. It was very much like when Copernicus said, no, we're not orbiting, we're orbiting the sun. The sun is not orbiting the earth. And that was very close to God. It's like, that was a form of blasphemy to suggest that we're not the center of the universe because of our special relationship to God. And Galileo was up against the Inquisition when he proved it. And I feel like McClintock ran into the same thing, saying um, that we're not little individual gods. We are being influenced constantly by each other, by the environment, by everything we experience. It's changing, literally changing our DNA. And that was a form of blasphemy, especially for white males, because genetics was a field out of which came eugenics, the whole horror of the Holocaust. The DNA theories were used to marginalize people of color, especially Black people.
Yes.
Um, so all of this is in my play, and I think her studies were driven by the fact she was so different. All of her studies were trying to understand why, yes, corn will, in a predictable way, if you cross this and this, you'll get this. But every thousandth ear of corn, you
Yes,
will get this thing.
yes,
And
yeah,
she was that odd ear of corn. She was like, I know there's nothing wrong with me. I know that I am in line with nature. I'm just unusual. Why
mhm,
is that? What is that about? And of course, we know now that variation is a way we strengthen the gene pool. That these
right,
mutations happen, and I think autism is a huge evolutionary boost. Like Greta might have the capacity to save the planet with her autism
yeah.
because she is able to withstand all of the ostracization and say and preach the inconvenient truth because of autism. If anybody will listen to her enough, yeah.
And
So
so it's like those kinds of things that I was inside my grandmother's body, because all the eggs that produced me were inside my mother. So I was inside my grandmother's body. And when she had trauma, that passed down to my mother, and then it passed down to me. And that trauma is still there unless and when we recognize that, then we can make progress. We can look at ourselves and each other in a very different way.
yeah, somebody in the chat just said jumping jeans. Yeah, that's what she called it. And of course, that opened her up to a lot. Autistic people are very vulnerable to being bullied and scapegoated. And so, as soon as the genes would be influenced by other genes, and they would change locations, and she called them jumping genes. And of course, that just proved she was a fruitcake and a woman. You
Yeah,
know,
right. Yeah,
yeah, and she got the Nobel Prize for jumping genes, but of course they referred to it as the translocation of the blah blah and the blah blah. They were no way going to give anybody a Nobel Prize for discovering jumping genes.
changing
But
things.
I love that she did that. I thought that was it was an
Yeah,
apt name for the
yeah.
phenomenon she was discovering. So that's the second play I wanted to talk about. The third one is a thrill of a lifetime because it's one of my classical plays. It's a play with a cast of over 20. It's biblical. It's the story of Esther and Vashti told through a lesbian feminist lens. It has an entire Persian army on the stage. It has an army that's composed, the women of the harem rise collectively to kill the men, and they join with the Jewish women because of the pogrom that's on the way, that's in the Bible, where they're going to slaughter all the Jews. So the Jewish women unite with the women of the harem, and the Jewish women are all subordinate and poverty class. So you've got the poor and the working poor rising women with the harem women um, coming together to kill their mutual oppressors. I mean, when people look at lesbian or even women's drama and say, well, where's our Count of Monte Cristo? Where's our Three Musketeers? Where is our El Cid or the big plays? It's like, I have one, Esther and Vashti. It is packed with adventure. It is like Count of Monte Cristo, only
Mhm.
it features lesbians. And it's
This is a new play.
no, I wrote it. I worked on it for 18 years. It's a huge
Mhm.
play because it has a cast of over 20 and it has four subplots. And a subplot, you have a major theme that you're doing and you develop that theme like Shakespeare, like all the real playwrights. They
Right,
all have,
right.
none of those playwrights, by the way, could have ever written a four-person play on a single set. A play
Mm.
is a big idea. The definition of theater is an arena of significant events. I cannot tell a significant story with four people in a single set. I do it, but a real play has 20 people. It has two intermissions. It has multiple scene changes, and it has four or more subplots that are refracting your central theme through different, sometimes comedic, other perspectives, like so that when you come out of that, you have been for 2.5 hours in the theater, you have been changed, you have been through a big event. In this case, you've been through a war where there's a huge slaughter of people going on, and there's a ritual mourning at the end. you've been through some shit. You have lived the women's revolution and you've
Yeah.
seen it. And
Well,
and that's what we
Babe,
don't do anymore. Even the mainstream theaters don't do that for economic reasons. It's all a marital couple in their freaking living room. And
yeah.
none of these playwrights said I wanted to be like Chekhov, Shakespeare, Moliere, Aeschylus. None of them wrote like that. If you
Mhm,
told them four people single set, they'd be like, "What's the point?
mhm.
Boring." But, give me 25
Yeah.
people, an army, everybody's going to murder each other on stage in a huge fight, women fighting for their lives, fighting to murder the men who've been raping them. It's like, oh my God, yes, buy me a ticket for that. So, this theater in New York specifically looks for big plays. Nobody wants a big play. It means you have to hire 20 actors at equity rates. They're putting this up as a reading with full cast. They're not double casting the small parts. Every role has its own actor. I saw it read privately. They read it privately for me. It was brilliantly cast. It's brilliantly Esther and Vashti, this lesbian couple, one of the Persian wealthy woman and the working class poor colonized Hebrew woman. That's the love interest in it. Those women rocked it. They were utterly believable. And their relationship, which is unusual if you're using straight actors, was completely believable. And it was nuanced. This is just a brilliant company, and they're reading a really important play. And I
Mhm.
thought in my lifetime, I will never see or even hear Esther and Vashti because it's unproducible. The size of it, the themes of it, the lesbianism, the women murdering men, um, it's unproducible. And they're going to produce a reading of it with professional
Uh,
actors.
yeah.
So go to
So
go to my
how many
website,
does, yeah, how many actors is Babe?
Babe. Well, that's a musical with a full dance chorus.
Yeah, right.
So that's like probably you can do it, I think, with something like 15 or so, but that's eliminating the dance
Right.
chorus. I
We
mean,
saw that at
20
Michigan,
or 30. Yeah, that was at National. Yeah.
or National, I mean, yeah,
It was a
yeah,
concert reading. It wasn't a full production,
right.
concert
Not a
reading.
full production, but we
No, it
we
didn't have
got
a
the
dance
idea.
chorus. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Yeah.
So
But yeah, I'm excited about Esther and Vashti. I think it's a really
that's
archival piece, and it's really it's kind of like the Count of Monte Cristo or Three Musketeers.
right.
It's written to be insanely popular. It's just I thought I'm never going to see it in my lifetime, but the reading's pretty damn close. You get a real sense of the
Oh,
play from the reading.
that's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
So is there anything else before I start asking you some of my questions and some of the questions that have come from the gals here that you want to say?
That's pretty much it. If you go to my website, carolyngage.com, you can go to my calendar and find the links. You can also
Right,
sign up for my newsletter. This star pattern is coming right up. I think it's
right.
the 14th or 15th of March. Later in March is the McClintock play, and then Esther and Vashti's in April.
Right.
So you got some time with those two.
Yeah. Um, so Laura asks, when you write a play with historical content characters, are you intending that the story provide information to the audience which will illuminate not only their understanding of the past, but also the present?
Always. And the thing is, a play is not a novel. A play happens in real time on a stage, and we're all in the room, ideally, in real life also. And the human brain, honestly, on some level, the human brain will feel like it's real. You'll have a kind of a memory of, oh, I was there when those women murdered all the men. It's like, and part of you is like, oh, that was a play. But another part of your brain is kind of like, I was there. I saw it.
Mhm.
That's the power of it. It affects you differently than just reading a story or even seeing a movie where it's on a screen. You're actually in the room with living beings that are enacting it. And that's why it's such a powerful medium, as opposed to
Yes.
seeing a film about women killing men, to be in the room when it happens and
Mhm.
have the memory of
But you
having.
know that there's 1,000 other people in that room around them, all the set people and all the camera people and all those
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Yeah.
not intimate. I mean,
No, it's a
they
totally
fool
different.
us into thinking it is, into believing that it is, but
But
live theater,
it's always contemporary. And if you look at the Shakespeare plays, the engravings, like they did, Antony and Cleopatra, which is set in, Greek and Roman times, they're all wearing Elizabethan costumes. And that wasn't because they couldn't get a bed sheet. It was because that was the art form. It is contemporaneous. They are wearing the clothing of today, 1530, as opposed to AD or BC or whatever. It's always been intended because we're just all really aware this is happening right now. Yeah, okay, it's supposedly Roman times, but really, I'm sitting here, they're doing it in front of me, and that's why they chose to, all the Shakespeare plays, the actors wore their own clothes. It was, and so it's always real time. And of course, I don't know what those times were like, even with McClintock in the 50s. I have no idea. I can imagine, and I'm extrapolating from my own contemporary experience. But yes, all of my plays, Star Pattern, it's happening right in front of you. It's not 1966. Those two women are in front of you, and the sniper is over all of us. It's Yeah, it's always contemporary, which is why it's so powerful. And when I did Joan of Arc, I wore Vietnam era fatigues because that was my
right?
war. I came of age in that war. I had started out wearing some kind of medieval costume, and I felt like it weakened the piece. I wanted to look kind of like a young punk wearing camo, but also it was a meaningful war for me because I was very involved in the anti-war movement. So when I wore, and I bought them at a surplus store, and they smelled like oil, like they had come from Vietnam, and the t-shirt had been hand mended, obviously by some guy who didn't have access to a sewing machine. So I assumed he was in the field with it. And I felt the power of that when I put it on. These are clothes that went through my war, the
Right.
Vietnam War. And so, yeah, it's always contemporary.
Yeah, it was so powerful. I just, I still remember it, and it was 25 years ago that I saw it. So,
Well, that's nice
um,
to hear.
so recently I've listened to the podcast of Square Peg that you have a link on your website, and you reflect in your diagnosis as a neurodivergent person and your diagnosis of autism at 68. Can you tell us something about your challenges and your successes living with this diagnosis?
Well, it made sense of a lot of things. For me, it was just nothing but a relief because I always knew there was something different about me. And I got a therapist who was also diagnosed late in life, and she's been hugely helpful. And she said, most women your age diagnosed this late in life are not doing well. They're extremely isolated and in extreme poverty because of their inability to hold a job. But I became self-employed doing my little special interest 35 years ago, so I didn't have to deal with that and the being fired from umpteen jobs and the toll that takes on your self-esteem. But I also, as I noted at the beginning, today is the 29th anniversary in Al-Anon, and I work a hard recovery program. I go to 3 to 4 meetings a week, and I have for 30 years, and I have a sponsor. And I lean into that because the world is a great mystery to me, especially other people. And my therapist said, she said, I think Al-Anon has saved your life. Because Al-Anon gives me a workaround. I learned a language of respect. I learned what a respectful confrontation sounded like. I learned what it was to be accountable for your behaviors. If you have injured another woman, what it sounds like to go and own that, and then to live your amends, which I do. Like I say, I still go to 3, 4 meetings a week. Um, and so I got a lot about communication, relationships. I learned how to be functional, which I would not have learned from being autistic. You just don't get social cues. We don't, we're living so much in our own world, or speaking just for me, the way my autism played out. But I have been aware that autism, I'll be in some business situation where person's lying to me, and I'm just like, well, you're lying.
Mhm.
I would actually be like, you're effing lying. I wouldn't, like I'd just be like,
Yeah.
and then I'm surprised that's the end of it. See, at that point, they're supposed to pay me. And of
Mm.
course, a neurotypical person is like, "No, Carolyn, that once you tell them they're lying, it's over. You're never going to get that money." Well, I didn't know that. I don't read social cues, but I had sponsors that would be like, according to my records, or I have a different memory of our agreement than what you're telling me now. Let me share with you what my memory. I learned how to do that, and it was like magic. They would pay me. And as an autistic person, I still don't understand why "you're a fucking liar" didn't work. But I did know after a certain amount of time it will never work. But I learned, I learned those skills in Al-Anon. I learned what worked. I never could figure out why, but I just know if you do, I have a different memory, you have a good chance of getting the money. You're a fucking
Mhm.
liar, you're never going to get it. So, I learned so many things in Al Anon that were, unbeknownst to me, workarounds for the way autism operates.
Mhm.
And I would tell people, okay, I got to shift into my Al Anon brain now.
Yeah.
I got to deal with a situation that is way outside my wheelhouse. But I'm going to talk through it with my sponsor, and then after it's over, I'm going to debrief with her, or I'm going to ask her to write out the notes or dictate to me what they think I should say. I just would do that. So I think that I have emerged for someone with no diagnosis for so long.
Oh,
I
really?
think that, yeah, I think
Yeah.
Al-Anon, honestly, it saved my bacon because business stuff was so, when it wouldn't go the way it should in my brain, which is not to say the way it should, but it's how it should in my brain. When things deviated from that, I had nothing. I just bring up
Mhm.
the file. What do I do now? And it's like, I don't know. It wasn't supposed to go this way. And so that's just saved my life, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm going to ask a question from our audience, but I wanted to ask JR, do you want me to read the question, or would you like to ask the question yourself?
No, you feel free to read them.
Okay. Um, as a person with Asperger's myself, she says, diagnosed in my early 60s, I'm wondering what led you to find out about yourself. And she's willing to explain her reasons.
Oh, well, it was interesting because I wrote the whole play about Barbara McClintock, not realizing she was autistic, which is insane now when I read it. She's obviously autistic. But somewhere in the writing of that, a friend of mine, a lesbian I knew from the Michigan Festival, had recently gotten diagnosed from a meltdown that she had, which was kind of inescapable. Like, okay, what was that? And she began to write about it and speak about it very openly. And I was curious. So I was following her postings, and at one point she made some mention of tiptoeing as a child, and that was the moment. As I spent my childhood on tiptoes, everybody noticed it, commented on it, and I knew flapping, and I knew some things were autistic. I'd never heard that. And in that moment, I remember I just sat there and suddenly I thought about the flapping. I thought about the humming, the buzzing. I have so many, many classic behaviors. And I thought, oh, good Lord, how did I miss that? But it was the tiptoeing, which I'd never heard, that really broke it open for me. And I still don't know why autistic children tiptoe. I don't, that, it seems like weird. I mean, the self-stimming, but I don't, I guess the tiptoeing was a form of stimulation. I felt sorry for people who didn't tiptoe. I felt like it put me on a slightly ethereal plane of living. I mean, flat-footed people seem pathetic to me.
Yeah, come in.
So anyway, that was the moment. But if you look at it, I just finished in McClintock's Corn. I was moving towards it. I think that the veil was getting very thin between me and understanding myself as autistic. But that was the moment where everything fell into place.
Yeah. tell us a little about your childhood dollhouse and decolonizing your life with the stories of the doll with her
Ah.
hair torn out.
Oh my gosh. Well, I had a
Thank you.
dollhouse. That was my area of special interest. I was playwriting very young, and because I didn't have a theater, I had a dollhouse. I had about 50 dolls. People just kept giving me dolls because they knew I had a dollhouse. And my friends that play dolls, they just take out their dolls and put different clothes on them. And I'm like, I mean, my dolls, you know, and I was a sexual abuse survivor, but my dolls were being sexually abused. They were falling in love. They were being abducted. They were being held captive. My dolls were like, you know, I was doing BBC dramas, you know, like they all had incredibly complicated, it was a palace, all kinds of intrigue. They had history with each other for days. I mean, just complicated family trees, everything. And it was richly rewarding. I would go into an altered state from 6 to 8 hours a day in the dollhouse. And I think my mother got that it was abnormal. She made me pack it up in the summer. I think she realized this child is never going to leave her bedroom. Which is true, but then I had a small portable dolls that I took out in the woods. I had an emergency doll kit because I didn't want to do reality. It was too horrifying. I rescued my neighbor, had a doll. They'd torn all her hair out, and she had ink all over her, like from a ballpoint pen. And she was my favorite doll, and her hair was all torn out, so she had kind of a little butch haircut. And I realized later she was lesbian and she was butch and she was a survivor. And decades before I even knew what those words meant, much less that this is my tribe, I had already created an avatar of my authentic self with no language or even models for reality for that. I knew that I don't see myself anywhere. But when I rescued that doll, it was like, there she is. And nobody ever talked about what had happened to her. We all knew it was terrible. But of all the stories I told, I never told the story of what happened to her. And of course, I didn't get my memories till I was in my early 30s. So I think that was part of the story too. Like we knew, but no one, out of tact, no one would address what had happened to her. But she was always rescuing and saving other women. All the dolls are female, you know, you just gotta love that. So anyway, that was me with the dolls and the power of the dolls. And as a horror to grow up and be a playwright, it's kind of like lesbians don't have the dollhouse. It's like we have to see ourselves. We have to be able to manipulate our characters and make the story come out the way we want it to, envision different endings. It's like, whatever it takes. And like I say, that military discipline is a tough pill for a lesbian to. So I'd be a director and I'm like, okay, when you say that line, put the cigarette out and cross the stage. Don't tell me what to do. Don't you effing tell me. And I'm like, I'm the director. This is actually what my job is. And I could just see in their face, it's like, don't tell me what to do. They couldn't move past, you're telling me what to do. It's like, that's what a director does. That's what a conductor does with an orchestra. That, you know, there are things in life collectively making art where somebody has to tell everybody what to do or it doesn't coordinate. But yeah, we need to get over that so that we can have the dollhouse, we can have that representation, we can take these utterly taboo identities like the doll whose hair has been pulled out, who's covered with tattoos, and tell the stories that are ours. But we don't have that dollhouse, and it was just too damn hard to build, and we didn't see the point in it in the first place because lesbians don't go to theater. And it's tragic, and we're paying the price of it now. We have a generation of young women who will not even use the word lesbian because they don't see any empowering narrative to it. And I'm kind of like, I write those, I have them, and nobody will produce them because they're too dangerous. And we just chose not to have theaters. Yeah, that's what happened. That's how that went. So,
well, I'm going to ask the folks. Let's unpin us and get into our larger group and see who we can do. Let's see if I can do that myself. Can somebody help me unpin?
You've got gallery view now.
I wanted to address, I see Donna has put a note here. She congratulates me on my recovery anniversary. Great. And she says, perhaps lack of lesbian theater is just part of the dissolution of lesbian solidarity and culture. I think it's more than that because we did have a whole lot of institutions and we never had lesbian theater. But there are a few, and she references Paula Vogel's play Indecent. I saw that, and it's based on what happened when God of Vengeance moved to Broadway. Yes, I appreciated that she unearthed that history. I have deeply strong and mixed feelings about Fun Home. If you Google Fun Home and Carolyn Gage, you'll probably land.
Oh, shoot. What did I do? Oh, my goodness. What did I do?
Well, you couldn't have done with Carolyn. I think Carolyn has to get back on. Send her the link, please.
How much more time do we have?
We have a half an hour and I'll take this off of full screen and that's what I'm recording and I will send her the link. Or
Okay.
maybe Roberta, can you send her the link? Because you've got her email address real handy. Roberta, can you do that? You're muted. I don't know how you were able to, oh, you were a co-host, Dee Dee. That's why you were able to just
Yeah, I was able
send her
to.
away.
I already sent it.
Thank you.
Okay, can somebody unspotlight me? Because I don't seem to be able to do it.
You're not, well, on the recording, you are not spotlighted. I put the recording in gallery view. Why don't you just go up to the top of your screen where it says view, click
Right.
on it and hit gallery.
Right.
Got it?
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry about that.
Somehow Carolyn got booted out.
Yeah.
I'll try to send it again just in case.
Why don't you call her? Anybody have her phone number?
No.
Well, I was wondering if Carolyn knew about AANE, Autism Asperger Association of New England. I'm a member of that.
Oh,
She said that she was removed by the host and she can't join again because she was removed by the host.
Oh,
my goodness.
I did not remove her. I have,
No, I must have done that. I was trying to unpin her and I must have removed her. Oh, shoot.
well,
That certainly is not a happy thing.
no, but she should be able to come back in.
Okay, I'm going to tell her to try again.
I set this up without a waiting room.
Okay, I sent her the note about trying again.
Want me to make you host, Roberta?
Me? I don't know
Yes.
what good that will do.
Maybe
You
it'll
can.
help.
Okay,
Make
let me get participants list then.
your co-host.
Yeah, I see that. Oh, Carolyn's calling me. Hi, Carolyn. You want to? Yeah, I sent the link again. Try again because I'm the co-host now. Maybe I can let you in. I don't know what just happened. It says she's unable to join the meeting because she was previously removed by the host.
So there's a place in the bottom of the participants list where you
Yeah.
can invite invite in real time. Try
Oh, that's
inviting
true.
her again from
Okay.
there. Or we
Okay,
might
I'll
have to
try.
Zoom.
All right. Can you do that, Roberta?
Yeah,
Okay, great, because it'll be easier for me if you do.
is Carolyn Gage at Gmail? Was it? No. Oh, right. That's right. Here it comes. I'm sending it now. Yeah, I'm sending it in, yeah, by email. It's coming. Let's just get this. I got to compose it. I don't know if it'll be, it might be the same link, but it's an invite, so maybe.
Otherwise, we can have her on the phone.
Okay, oops, it's not copying. Okay,
Can you patch her
I
in
can
with
do
the
that.
phone?
I can do that. It's on the speaker now.
Okay.
Okay, am I on your speakerphone now?
Yeah, can you hear
Yes.
her?
Yes,
Yes, I can. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
yes.
Yes.
everybody hears you.
Oh, great. Oh, good. I don't know what that is. I think it's probably because when you kick somebody off a meeting, it's because they're misbehaving. So they don't, if you've been blocked by the host or kicked off by the host, they apparently just automatically, you can't just keep, interrupting the meeting and getting back on and kicked off again. So I don't know how I got kicked off, but they keep sending me a message that I was kicked off by the host, so I can't get back in. So I'm still waiting for Roberta's new invitation, but I have a pretty good idea if it's the same link, it won't work.
Well, why don't we just carry on this way with you on the phone, Carolyn? This is JR.
And
Okay,
I'll try to send this
works for
again.
me. That works just fine for me.
Okay.
Yeah. It's weird they don't have a message of what you can do to fix that, because I'm sure I'm not the first person who's had that experience. But I'm sure it's to avoid harassment,
Yes, that's
Yeah.
exactly what it's for.
Yeah. But anyway, I was saying Fun Home, is about a lesbian, but the plot really centers on her gay father, who is a sexual predator. And so a lot of people actually think of it as a gay male play, as do I. There's a charming little falling in love in college with a woman, but everything is overshadowed by the fact that her father is a serial perpetrator. He's a teacher, and gay, and in a heterosexual marriage. So yeah, I loved the book and I hated the musical. They tried to turn it into this kind of upbeat. There's nothing upbeat about having a father who's a child raper. It can't. It was a poor idea, I think, to try to make a musical out of that. And it's treated like it's a form of infidelity or a little foible in his character. It's like, no, it's criminal activity. It should be the same response as if he's murdering small children. As soon as you realize your father has this secret life, everything changes. First off, you call the police. There was never any suggestion or mention that anybody in the family should report him to the police. Never. And yeah, so that to me was offensive, and it was actually frightening because everybody in the theater gave the play a standing ovation, and I stood up and clapped too because I was afraid to sit. I was afraid not to stand. I didn't want to draw attention to myself as a survivor. All my incest stuff was way through the roof. It was such a perpetrator apologist piece of propaganda, the musical. It just sentimentalized it. It was just, yeah. So that's me on Fun Home, and yes, I'm glad it had such a lovely run, and was successful because you know, Allison Bechdel's work has been so important to us, but no, if your father's a perpetrator, don't make a musical out of it. The bittersweet story of the dysfunctional family, no, it's a horror. So saying that from somebody whose father was a perpetrator, it was a horror.
Mm.
Yeah. Didn't mean to shut down all the conversation with that cheerful little theater review, but I have strong opinions, you know.
Right.
On that subject anyway. So what else have we got? What other questions do we have? Hopefully nothing that elicits that kind of response. Sorry.
When you speak of your hyper focus and you say you look insensitive when you're absorbed, can you talk about how that manifests and what does it mean when you say you look at people differently and that you have a knack that helps you deconstruct characters?
Well, first part, I just demonstrated it. Somebody who probably very had a wonderful experience at Fun Home and really appreciated seeing a lesbian on stage and a butch lesbian and all that. And I just shot it to pieces because all I'm focused on is the incest narrative. I think that was an insensitive response to a sincere, like, we do have some nice things. And I'm like, no, we don't. I think that was an autistic framing of my response. It was not tactful. It was insensitive. It just was a slam dunk, like, no. So there's an example of it in action right there. Lack of tact, lack of really taking a moment to consider where the person who asked the question was coming from, and just caught up in, let me tell you what happened to me, you know, because that's the final word on everything. Yeah, and that looks like assholatry. And it's autism. So I just demonstrated it for you, and I hope you will be gracious and forgiving of that. The second part of that question, I didn't really understand. Can you ask it again?
About you say that what does it mean when you say you look at people differently and that you have a knack that helps you deconstruct characters?
A knack for I'm not sure where I said that or what it meant. I don't know how neurotypical people look at other people, so I'm not sure how I do it differently. I know that I kind of go into meeting people with an assumption we're going to have difficulty communicating, just because that's been my history. Not being able to read social cues is a tremendous handicap in communicating. Deconstructing characters. I mean, I feel like I just am a born dramatist. I have a good sense of character. I have a good sense of what's interesting on the stage. I have a really good sense of what motivates my characters and why they will act a certain way. And in any character, you can just say, well, how would they act in this situation or that? And I know exactly what they would do. In real life, I can't do that very well. I don't really think of, like, no to men. How's that going to land in my community? I never gave it a thought. So yeah, it's interesting that I think I have a great deal of insight, really, really sensitive insights into characters that I create, but I go like a bull through the china shop in human relationships. I feel most comfortable with people who are in active recovery because we speak a same language. We speak a language of accountability and boundaries and amends and respectful behaviors and communications and taking responsibility. I know where I stand in any interaction with people in the recovery community. If they're outside recovery, I have no idea what's going on with them or how they're going to respond to anything. So the older I get, the more I just hang with people in recovery.
Uh-huh. So your lens of autism is certainly also with your lens of radical lesbian feminism and your gender non-conforming person is for me when I see your plays and when I hear them and when I read them, I connect immediately. And I think that you have, as this gender nonconforming person, your voice and your life's work seems to be only open to those of us that are somewhat like you. What do you think is the barrier for recognition?
I just think back before I was lesbian, and I had some lesbians in my life, and I was wildly uncomfortable around them, and I couldn't tell you why. I just knew that I was, and then after I came out, I understood. I saw heterosexual people differently. I saw their privilege in stark relief, which I had not seen when I was practicing heterosexual. I think that the lesbian narrative is profoundly threatening to the mainstream culture. And I feel like, for instance, well, it's sort of like doing white theater all the time, and then you're going to do a black play for, Black History Month. But if you do it right, and if it's a good play, it calls into question whatever the hell you're doing the other 11 months. And so people get squirrely around it. Like they want like Black history to stay in February and not disturb the rest of the canon. And I think lesbian plays, they'd bring me in for a weekend to some college campus, but they wouldn't hire me. And it's like, let's just have a little token, tip of the hat, a little feather in our diversity cap. We're going to produce a Carolyn Gage play and hope it stays, on Friday night and doesn't spill over to next week or whatever. And I think that people find that a powerful lesbian narrative really undoes everything else you're doing. And especially true when you center a butch, and especially when you center a butch who's a survivor. It doesn't stay in the little diversity box of like, oh, this weekend is our lesbian play for the year. I believe that it just is profoundly threatening. That is why it's powerful and it's threatening, and that is why I have been libeled way before the current cancel culture. I was being libeled 40 years ago. I feel like my work is misunderstood, intentionally misunderstood, misinterpreted. It's just scary. It's it's like Copernicus and Galileo saying that the sun does not actually revolve around white men, heterosexual men. The sun itself might possibly be a lesbian, and they're like, what? Burn her at the stake. Burn her at the stake.
Yeah,
I
right.
just think it's a great tragedy of us not having our own theaters. It's incredibly powerful, and everybody but lesbians seems to know it. The amount of energy they put into silencing us is so great. We should look in the mirror and say, what the hell are they so afraid of? Because I'm missing it. And I think we are. It's like, it's extraordinary. We're a tiny number of people, and they just make sure that not a peep out of us is heard. And we should take that seriously. And that's why I'm saying what you do in your living room is powerful. Just get it out there, even if it's just in your living room. It's incredibly powerful.
Yeah. Did you want to talk anything about Joelle Taylor? And I just saw on your website your interview with her, and it was fabulous.
Thank you. There is a case in point of unfiltered autism, if ever. Joelle Taylor excited me so much. I knew when I was interviewing her, I was not going to be able to be thinking about anything like, how is this going to sound when it goes up on my YouTube channel? I just was absolutely unfiltered. Like, oh my God, I was fangirling like an idiot, like a 16-year-old girl. I really kind of made an idiot of myself, but I don't care. I mean, I was authentic. She was, her work is so, suddenly everything looks flat, like two-dimensional in the presence of her poetry. It's like, oh my God, this is what we've been missing. It's like everything black and white and gray, and suddenly she walks in Technicolor. It's like, oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
Read her
You wanna-
poem. I think I think Kunto has just been published. I don't know if it's in the U.S. yet, but I'm seeing it turn up in some libraries here. I got so excited because she's lifting up the lesbian butch, the lesbian working class butch. She's not afraid to talk about eating disorders, mental illness, oppression, women's oppression, and she's not afraid to center it in women's biology and anatomy, which is, as you all know, absolutely taboo these days. Everything she did just made me feel healed and whole and sane and like, yes, 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 she is out there representing, and the fact that she won the highest poetry award in the UK is a stunner. I don't even know how that happened, except that she is so incontrovertibly excellent. They couldn't not give it to her. I'm sure they didn't want to give it to her. And finally, at the end of the day, it was like, we have to. We just have to. She clears the field. There's nobody who can touch her. Her work is amazing. Go and listen to it. And if you want to see me look like a little fangirl, you can go watch my interview. I really was just like, I
loved it.
kind of like, I had a few moments of what should I wear? Not for the audience.
I loved it. I just
I
loved
knew
it.
she was going to be this fucking dapper butch. And I'm
Yeah,
like,
right.
what can I do to keep up with that? And yeah, I know. It's like,
Yeah.
I had a whole lot of high school going on in that interview, let me tell you.
Did you want to talk at all about the Don't Say Gay bills that are passing in 7 states already?
I don't know what to say about it. People come to me for policy. Policy's not my strong suit because policy is political. Policy is about compromises. It's about looking at what's out there in the field, what's realistic, what you can get past, what you can't get past. I tend to be too much of an idealist to deal with the realities of policy. That's policy move. It's very frightening on so many fronts, what's happening. The abortion front is terrifying. Everything I have to say really political about lesbians is in the lesbian tent revivals. And I'm just like, there's 4 volumes of them.
Right.
Download them for $12. Do that. But yeah, that is a policy issue. It's consistent with everything we're moving towards right now. And it's really frightening.
Right.
And I feel, as I've always felt, the people it hits the hardest is the young people.
Right.
These young people are, when the adults are doing this, they don't know what to make of it. It's terrifying for them. They're gay, and suddenly you're not even allowed to mention the word in school. Like, we don't have a history, we don't have a culture.
And if you do, they can turn you into your parents. That's the worst thing that can happen.
Well, fortunately, they can't turn back the clock. The internet is here. They can get a flashlight and under their bed at night, or under the sheets, they can find all kinds of young people's, chat rooms and so on. It will never be what it was before the internet. They can find their tribe, but it's still not easy, and that's just another marker of that the powers that be don't want us to exist. It's deeply upsetting, and it's coming at a time when lesbians are not doing alliances effectively, and some of that's on us, and much of it's on them, the alphabet soup of the LGBTQ, et cetera. But we need to. What I would say if it was a friend of mine, I'd be like, go to a meeting, find a way. Figure it out.
Right.
Figure it out.
Yeah.
We have to make coalition. We have to.
Yeah. Right.
That's just like, put on the big girl panties and figure out some way to work in coalition, because the people that are coming for us don't give a shit about the infighting that is happening.
Right. Right.
They'll kill all of us.
It's all divide and conquer, right? JR,
Thank you. Yeah, I have one last question because it's for almost 5:05. And Carolyn, I'm wondering about the play that is the reading in New York City.
Yeah.
Could you let us know when and where that's happening, or is that on your website? I haven't been on the website.
It's on my website, on my calendar. And it is a play company called the Skeleton Rep. And I think if you just Google the Skeleton Rep, it's their salon series. They do the salon series. They'll read a play several times a year. And this is part of their salon series. But I think if you go to Skeleton Rep, you'll find information, and you can get that link off of my calendar. And if all else fails, just email me and I will. I don't believe they've announced. I'm not sure they're charging for it. I don't know about that. I am pretty sure it's a webinar format, and you will have to register as you do, even when it's free. You know, you register for the webinar and then you get
Right.
sent the link. I'm pretty sure that's what the deal is going to be. I'm not sure that's even up yet. So I don't think you can get access to it yet. But you can also go to my website and sign up for my email newsletter, and I send that out every 2 weeks. And this thing doesn't happen until April, so you'll for sure get information about it if you're on my my email list.
Yes, I am. And I have all of your sermons.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just really appreciate you and the work you do. And thank you so much for spending all of this time with all of us.
Oh, it was really a thrill to talk with you. I'm sorry I got myself booted off, but that is consistent. It's almost like expected. So I'm glad we found a workaround for that. And I don't mean to scold you like you 15 women are solely responsible for why we don't have lesbian theaters. I appreciate just being able to rant about that. It's a big deal in my world that there are no theaters.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, and if you're ever interested in holding a reading, happy to help you out with that.
okay.
All right, thank you.
Well,
Thank you, Carolyn.
Okay, I'm gonna get off now, but thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Okay,
Carolyn.
Bye.
All right, so it's time. Does anyone have an announcement before we shut down?
you want to turn the recording off?
I am. Hang on a moment.